talk about one of my favorite subjects, and that's trade and exports and international engagement. It's important for not only Saskatchewan, it's important for Canada, it's important for Africa, it's important for the world, quite frankly, because we all get better, we all do better, whether it's by business or with our families or with institutions and agencies, when we engage and when we talk about critical issues like international trade, in business engagement. It's important, as we'll get into as we talk about the importance in the relationship between Saskatchewan, Canada, and Africa. So a genuine pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Increased international trade, companies in more than one country, greater dependence on global economies, freer movement of capital and goods and services. I think we've all benefited from that. But I think, as you have noted, over the last 3 to maybe 5 years, we've experienced what some economists are labeling globalization, which is dominated by protectionism in certain markets and by certain governments, where they're looking to protect local markets. There's trade imbalances, there's issues with respect to immigration, IP protection, control of new technologies, geopolitical issues, issues with respect to logistics and supply chains, and then, of course, COVID-19 and all of its anomalies as it relates to supply and demand have really put some headwinds against, I think, international engagement and trade in specific. In Saskatchewan, we have fairly well over these last couple of years, and indeed, Saskatchewan exports to the world reached 30 billion, over 30 billion in 2020, which is about a 2.5% increase over 2019. We're the only province in Canada to experience an increase in exports in that year, and the reason is relatively simple. The growth in exports were due to substantial volumes of agriculture commodities, which are shipped to international markets in spite of the worldwide downturn in economies during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our key markets are keenly aware that Saskatchewan's robust agricultural industry produces high quality products at incredible volumes. And so the need to feed the world does not pause for pandemic. Indeed, our export highlights included a 15% increase in wheat, a 32% increase in durum, a 47% increase in canola seed, a 60% increase in peas, and a 96% increase in lentils. Our forest products also fared fairly well, in that our dimensional lumber exports increased by 29%, while OSB, which is oriented strand board, exports increased by 97%. So we say that Saskatchewan has what the world needs: of food, fuel, and fertilizer. And I think that's something that will dominate over the years to come. Saskatchewan fared a little better. Our 1.2 billion in exports to Africa represents about 30% of total exports from all provinces. So we are Canada's #1 exporting province to Africa. Our biggest markets include Algeria, Morocco, Nigeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Sudan, South Africa, and Mozambique. Our exports to Africa are largely commodity driven. We sell a lot of wheat, lentils, soybeans, peas, canary seeds into African markets. Some of the non-ag commodity exports include potash and our incredible array of dryland broadacre farming implements, particularly to the South African market. I would add that our exports to Africa are growing. Year-to-date total exports from Saskatchewan have risen by over 51% in the first 6 months of this year, 2021. So there's tremendous opportunity in Africa as the economies grow and the middle class grows in those economies, because with that growth comes affluence, purchasing power. And with affluence, Africans are going to be able to purchase what they need. And again, as I had mentioned, Saskatchewan has what the world needs: the 3 F's: food, fuel, and fertilizer. The globalization is marked by protectionism. Governments are looking to protect their local markets rather than opening up to the world. And we need to combat that as international markets and international businesses look to better themselves through that international engagement. And you do that through things like free trade agreements. Canada has a number of free trade agreements around the world, most notably with the United States, with the European Union through CETA, through TPP in Asian markets, and through bilateral arrangements through countries like South Korea. So it's not all bad news. I think that governments and businesses will understand the betterment of both economies and all economies through free trade agreements and through international engagement. I'm very positive about the world economies as it relates to international engagement through free trade agreements. And of course, we all know very well that Africa has also engaged in their own internal free trade agreement, which bodes well not only for Africa, but for the world. Businesses, regardless of their location, is typically risk adverse. So for many Canadian businesses, indeed those from Saskatchewan, Africa remains a market that is not familiar. There's uncertainty, and business doesn't like uncertainty. So there are hundreds of markets around the world, all competing with similar goods to sell and similar needs and demand to buy. So all things being equal, buyers will choose what they're familiar with. So, what helps to reduce that uncertainty, to de risk investment or trade from a government perspective, is that Africa needs to ensure rules based trade. And what I mean by that is fair, transparent, and enforceable rules of trade, whether it's reducing tariffs and non tariff barriers, science based decision making on sanitary and phytosanitary reasons. And dispute mechanisms. As we just talked about, there's been significant leaps forward in that regard in the work being done on the Afro-Continental Free Trade Agreement. And with COVID and the attention to US and China issues, we've really missed what could be an exciting game changer in that regard. That pact will create the largest free trade area in the world measured by the number of countries participating. It's going to connect 1.3 billion people across 54 or 55 countries with a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion. And that pact comes at a time, as we have just noted, when much of the world is turning away from cooperation and free trade. So, really, Africa accounts for just about 2% of global trade. So the potential for transformational change in that uncertainty in Africa, if those free trade principles contained within the FTA are adopted internationally, will be really a game changer. A number of concepts and strategies that Canadian businesses can and should embrace to increase business in Africa. There's a Canadian saying that describes the play of one of the world's greatest hockey players, and that's Wayne Gretzky, that says you should go to where the puck is going to be, not where the puck is. What we're saying by that is that businesses need to recognize the enormous potential that African continent holds in terms of not only the total market, but the growth opportunity that we talked about earlier. The second notion is that we need to reduce that uncertainty that envelops the market. And you start that process by familiarization. Research the opportunities in Africa, engage in market intelligence, one of the services that is offered by STEP. We can start to think about high level visits and missions to African countries and thinking long term because Africa's rise will not be linear and will vary by market. And I think the last piece of advice I would give is simply an expansion of that last point on the variety of markets. We have a tendency to think big, to think too broadly when considering markets. It's important to understand that that is the case in Africa. It's not one market, it's 54, 55 countries, each with a very different market, each with a very different population and economy and language and culture, from South Africa to Nigeria. So it will be critical for businesses to focus their energy on specific markets, to target. And again, that's something that STEP can do to help exporters with. You do that, as I'd mentioned, by familiarization. So we really need to get to know each other. And it starts with things like the Canada Africa Agri Summit. It's talking about the issue, it's about business to business, it's about engagement, it's about familiarization to understand what the issues are and to really target where we should be in Africa and where African businesses need to be in Saskatchewan. So these conversations, these summits are a start of it. And you can get very specific. As I mentioned, STEP has a market intelligence unit that deals with exporters from Saskatchewan and answers the questions that they may have about the African market. Who are the buyers? What are the regulations? What are the issues with respect to inter and subnational trade within Africa? What are the labeling requirements? All of these things are about familiarization, understanding what the opportunities are, and answering the questions that businesses need. Absolutely. So STEP is the trade promotion organization for Saskatchewan. We're an independent membership-based trade promotion organization contracted by the provincial government and work in concert with the provincial government in assisting exporters accessing international markets around the world. We have a number of programs, including outgoing missions, incoming missions. We help to de-risk, as we had been talking about today, efforts into new markets like Africa, programs and services like our market access program. But we also have a market intelligence unit, which is designed to answer the questions and to provide the information that is critical in entering new markets like Africa. So when exporters from Saskatchewan are asking the question, where should we go? What are the markets in Africa that we should be looking at very specifically and targeted? That's something we can do through our market intelligence unit. So they can reach out to STEP. We're online. We're at sasktrade.com. Check us out online or give me a shout directly about what we can do for Saskatchewan exporters. It's an excellent service. It's a very unique model that has been very efficient and effective in connecting Saskatchewan businesses with the world. So STEP is dedicated and focused on exporting. We help Saskatchewan companies connect with African businesses. So if African businesses are looking to source a Saskatchewan supplier, they can come to us and that we will make that connection. We call it B2B, business to business. So they can contact STEP if they're looking for a particular item, service, or good. As it relates to investment, they're encouraged to call and contact the Trade and Export Development Saskatchewan, the Ministry of Trade and Export Development, who have investment attraction specialists that will help African companies connect and look to investment opportunities in the province.